Hello, everybody. This is Gary Mrozinski, and we are about to start Chapter 5 of The Microeconomy Today by Schiller and Gebhardt, published by McGraw-Hill. But before we do that, I think I'll give you kind of a roadmap for your immediate future. We are going to be covering two chapters in which we're drilling down into the demand curve. So with microeconomics, I told you we're going to drill down further into the demand curve and drill down further into the supply curve. We're going to learn more about how individual buyers make their purchase decisions. That's the demand for the product. And we're going to learn more about how individual business firms make their production decisions. That's the supply side of the market. So chapters 5 and 6. Chapter 5, we talk about consumer behavior, consumer choice in general. Then chapter 6 is price elasticity, which is a very interesting topic. That is, these are theories of consumer behavior. Again, why people buy what they buy and how much they buy is explained by these theories. Then we have a series of chapters on the supply side of the market. Again, talking about the individual business firm and how they make their decisions. Starting with chapter 7, that's costs of production. And then we have a chapter on each of 4 different types of market structures where what is varying is level of competition. First, we start with pure competition. That's chapter 8 and also chapter 9. Those two combined are pure competition. That's when there's lots and lots and lots of sellers of the product, hundreds or even thousands of sellers. And that would be best for the consumer when you have lots of choice and there's lots of competition. Then we look at the other extreme. That's chapter 10, monopoly. That's when there's only one seller of the product. Well, that's going to be the worst for the consumer. Then we have a chapter on oligopoly. That's when there's just a few large sellers who have most of the market share. And you can think of like wireless cell phone service. You only have a couple choices. That's an oligopoly market. And then finally, chapter 12, which is monopolistic competition. That's the market structure that describes most of our markets. There's lots of choice. It's not quite pure competition, but it's still really good. Anyway, that's where we're going. This is chapter 5, the first of a series of 2 chapters on consumer demand and explaining consumer demand. So consumer choice, as we learned in chapter 3, the law of demand says buyers react to price changes. If the price goes up, quantity demanded goes down. If the price goes down, the quantity demanded goes up. So we're going to sort of extend that and talk about that in more depth and answer questions like, well, what do we buy when prices are changing? How do we change our minds about what it is we are buying? What makes us feel so good about our purchases? We're going to talk about what's called utility theory. What is the benefit we get from products? How does that enter into our consumer decisions? And then how do we decide how much of one thing to buy versus another thing? All of this is going to be discussed further in this chapter. Before we start talking about how economic theories explain consumer behavior, there are other theories that also influence a buyer. An economist assumes that a buyer is strictly rational. You look at information, including pricing information, and you make rational decisions, and there are no other influences on you for the most part. Well, there are also sociopsychiatric theories. Sociopsychiatric, you can see that's like 2 words jammed together, sociology and psychiatric. So, yes, there are sociopsychiatric explanations in some cases, and we'll start with psychiatric theories. And Freud, you may have heard about Sigmund Freud. He was an Austrian, really the father of psychiatry. He's known for his psychoanalysis theories of id, ego, superego, Oedipus complex you may have heard about, repression, defense mechanisms. These are all his theories. And regarding his explanations for why we buy some of the things we buy, and should I do this with an Austrian accent? I can do that if it helps. No, I guess I should not do that. Anyway, we strive for ever higher levels of consumption, meaning purchasing products, to satisfy basic drives for security, sex, and ego gratifications. What do you think? We clothe and adorn ourselves in ways that assert our identity and worth. Yeah, I could kind of see that. We eat and smoke too much because we need the oral gratifications and security associated with the mother's breast. I'm not going to say anything about that. Oversized homes and cars give us a sense of warmth and security remembered from the womb. Are you buying any of this? We often buy and consume some things we don't really want to assert our rebellious feelings about our parents. I could see that. I have a 17-year-old son, and I can see that being valid in some cases. Our motivation to buy, this is his overall theory, comes from the constant interplay of these id, ego, and superego drives. So this is psychiatric theory. Now, sociological theory is a little more apparent and a little more, it's not so hidden below the surface. Consumption behavior is influenced by our yearning to stand above the crowd, to receive recognition from the masses. This does kind of make sense. For one who is exceptionally talented, this recognition comes easily. For the rest of us, we have to get this recognition by conspicuous consumption, by the things that we buy. A new sports car, fancy clothes, an exotic vacation. These are ways that we try to stand out or stand above the crowd, because otherwise it's not happening for us. But not all consumption is motivated by ego or status concerns. If you remember Maslow's hierarchy of needs theory, you've probably seen this in other classes, like the management course we talk about it, even in the marketing course. There are lower level needs. There are such as physiological needs, needs for food, water, shelter, that kind of thing. Well, some of the purchases we make are to satisfy our physiological needs, and some are to satisfy our security needs. And there's nothing else behind our motivation to buy those things. Some food we buy because we're hungry. Some clothing we buy because we're cold. Some housing we buy because we need to be sheltered from the elements. So sociopsychiatric theory doesn't explain all consumption, just some special consumption that we do. And most Americans, after satisfying these needs, have discretionary income, which is the income we then use to buy these other products. Okay, let's set aside sociopsychiatric theory and get back to economic theory. Those other theories might explain why we make some purchases, but I think that's a small percentage of our purchases, and price and income is more important, I think, to most of the products that we purchase. This is an interesting graphic in your textbook which shows you the percent of teens that own these products. And being the father of a 17-year-old, DVD player, I think we need to take that one off the list. That's probably obsolete. Digital camera, I think you take off the list. It can't be 70% of teenagers have a digital camera. Most people are using the digital camera that's built into their smartphone. But the others, my son has all of those products. So I'm going to agree with this graphic mostly. Remember from chapter 3, demand curve shifters, determinants of demand. These are 4 of the 5 that we discussed. Tastes, people's taste for products determine what the demand is. Their taste can increase over time or decrease over time. Consumers' taste for a certain product. Income, as income levels rise, then the overall demand for most products goes up. If income goes down, overall demand goes down. If people's expectations about the future are optimistic, they tend to spend more money. If they're pessimistic, they spend less money. And then prices of related products. Remember this, there's 2 ways products can be related. They can be substitutes for each other. So if the price of a substitute product is going down, then people are going to stop buying this product and start buying that product. So overall demand goes down. If the price of a substitute product goes up, people are going to leave that market and come to this market. And then the other way products can be related is they can be complements of each other. Products you tend to buy together, like hot dogs and hot dog buns, computers and software. And if the price of a complementary product goes way up, the demand for my product goes down because it's a complement of that other product. And then the opposite would be true too. So these are the determinants of demand. They sort of determine what the demand for a product is, these factors. Now the rest of this chapter we're going to talk about what's called utility theory. You heard a little bit about this in chapter 3. Do you remember the law of diminishing marginal utility? That is a utility theory. But we're going to talk a lot more about utility theory in general. Utility is the benefit or satisfaction we get from consuming a product. So remember, the meaning of the term consumption means someone buys and uses a product. Now, if it's a food product, of course, you physically consume it, but consumption in general just means you're buying and using the product. Why is it you buy and use products? Because you derive some sort of satisfaction or benefit from it. That satisfaction or benefit is the utility of that product. So total utility is the total amount of benefit or satisfaction we get from buying all of the things we buy in some period of time. That's total utility. Now the word marginal means extra. So marginal utility means extra utility, specifically the amount of extra utility you get from consuming one more unit of a thing that you're consuming multiple units of. So then marginal utility is the change in total utility when the quantity that you're consuming changes. Usually we think in terms of consuming one more unit of a thing, but we could consume 10 more units of the thing, and that increases our total utility by some amount. When you do that, if in your computation, you have to remember to put 10 in the denominator because the change in quantity was 10. Most of our examples, we're going to be changing the quantity by 1. We'll be counting by 1. So the change, again, marginal utility is the change in total utility when you consume one more unit of a thing. And here's this law that you've seen already in chapter 3, which helps to explain the law of demand. The law of diminishing marginal utility. So diminishing just means decreasing. So this is the law of decreasing extra utility. That's another way to say it. So the law of diminishing marginal utility says, as you consume more and more units of some product, the extra utility you derive from each unit you consume is decreasing or diminishing. It's getting smaller and smaller. And I love the pizza example. Let me go to the really cool illustration on the next slide. This does not look like me whatsoever. However, imagine that this guy walks into a pizza restaurant and it's lunchtime and he's hungry and he buys the first piece of pizza and he derives 10 utils of satisfaction because he's very, very hungry and that was very satisfying. Then he goes up to the counter, buys another piece. The second piece, he gets 7 utils of marginal utility, extra utility. Goes up and buys the third. He still could eat some more. He's not as hungry as he once was, but he buys the third piece. He derives 4 utils of extra utility, marginal utility. So the marginal utility is diminishing. The first piece gave him 10 utils. The second piece gave him 7 utils. The third piece gave him 4 utils. It could get to the point where, let's see, he's had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He said he's holding the 6th piece in his hand. It could be that that 6th piece will represent negative marginal utility. If he eats that 6th piece, he'll be actually worse off. His total utility goes down because it's making him sick. So this will happen for any product that we buy and consume. The marginal utility will diminish. So how many pieces of pizza do you buy? Well, the answer is depends on what the price is. Because if the price is, say, $1, then you're going to compare that $1 to the benefit you would get in consuming each of those pieces. So let's say $1 to you is definitely worth 10 utils of satisfaction. So you'll consume the first piece. And you'll even consume that second piece because $1 is definitely worth 7 utils of satisfaction. And now you're going to go up to the counter and buy the third piece, 4 utils for $1. Yeah, that's to you represents good value, but you won't eat any more. What if the price goes up to $2? Now you might only buy 2 slices because, let's see, it was 10 utils, then 7 utils, then 4 utils. $2 to you is worth 7 utils of satisfaction. So you'll eat the first and second pieces, but not the third because that's 4 utils of satisfaction or utility, and that to you is not worth it. So again, this explains in part the law of demand. If the price goes down, we'll consume more units. If the price goes up, we'll consume fewer units. This is the example that's in the textbook, which is really the same kind of example. And in this case, you're buying popcorn, and you can see this is boxes of popcorn, let's say at a movie theater, and you can see how marginal utility is counting down, and total utility counts up, but by smaller amounts, but then eventually marginal utility goes negative. So this must mean that you get sick after the 5th box. And even the 5th box had very little marginal utility for you. So then the question is, how many boxes are you going to buy? We can't answer that question because we would need to know the price of a box of popcorn. Because you're comparing that price to the utils you get from each of these extra units that you might be buying. You would, here's a question you can answer for sure. What if the popcorn was free? Well, the rational person would consume 5 boxes, as many boxes as will give him positive marginal utility. But if you're paying for these boxes, let's say it's $3 a box, you definitely wouldn't buy that 5th box. It can't be that the 5th box has 1/20th of the extra utility as the first. So you're probably not going to buy the 5th box, maybe not even the 4th. Anyway, we're going to take this kind of thinking and try to think about how we spend our money on all of the combinations of products we spend it on in, say, a given week. If you graph these quantities, you can see total utilities on the left, marginal utilities on the right, and they're showing this as a stepwise function, which I guess, strictly speaking, is correct. Usually you see these functions drawn as a smooth upward sloping, for total utility upward sloping, and then it levels off and starts to come down. So increasing at a decreasing rate, plateauing, and then decreasing. And then diminishing marginal utility, you can see that's going downhill the whole way, eventually goes negative. And you're going to see on the next slide, I think, a better representation. This is just a different example of these same curves. Total utility, again, is increasing at a decreasing rate, flattens out, plateaus, and then starts to decrease. And marginal utility is going downhill the whole way, eventually going negative. I have a question for you. What do you think that vending machine on the right would cost to purchase? So this is a pretty sophisticated piece of equipment. It's first of all refrigerating cold drinks, and it can handle money. And newer versions of these have electronics where you can use a credit card and connect it to the internet and all of that. But it's meant, even the mechanical design of this thing is pretty sophisticated because it's meant to deliver one product, exactly 1 unit of one of these drinks at a time. It's meant to control that. It's also meant to be very secure so someone can't break into it. Have you ever seen a vending machine like the one on the left, dispensing newspapers? Question is, why don't they make the newspaper vending machine as sophisticated as the cold drinks vending machine? If you've ever used one of these newspaper vending machines, you simply put your money in. Looks like it's 50 cents in this case. You open the front cover of this box. It's just a simple metal box, and there's a stack of newspapers in there. You take your newspaper out. You could take the whole stack if you want to, but you close it up and you go on your way. So they're not concerned about the security of that whole stack of newspapers as they're concerned about the security of all of those drinks in that refrigerated vending machine on the right. The vending machine on the left is probably, I don't know, a couple $100 at the most. The vending machine on the right is thousands of dollars. The reason they don't spend thousands of dollars to design a newspaper dispensing vending machine is because of the law of diminishing marginal utility. What is the marginal utility of the second newspaper to any one consumer? It's just about zero. You don't need a second newspaper. So there's not really any incentive for you to take the whole stack of newspapers. I guess you could probably go downtown and sell them on a street corner and try to make money that way, but who would do that, right? It's also perishable. The value or benefit, it's no good to you the second day, right? The next day it's already old news. You're going to be buying, a more recent newspaper. So you can't buy the whole stack. You use one newspaper today, one newspaper tomorrow, because it's already has perished. It's perishable. So for that reason, because of the law of diminishing marginal utility, the vending machine does not need to be very sophisticated. So that's a simple application of the law of diminishing marginal utility. So again, the reason that the law of diminishing marginal utility is connected to the law of demand is because since the law of demand says as the price goes up, the quantity demanded goes down. As the price goes down, the quantity demanded goes up. Imagine the price is set as some amount, some dollar amount. You are purchasing a certain quantity of a product because to you, you're thinking about the marginal utility of the last unit you're buying. And to buy one more unit of the thing is not worth the price to you. But if the price comes down, you might buy one more unit of the thing. You might buy 7 instead of 6. Again, think of the pizza example. By the way, for me, consuming pizza, I probably don't go into the negative marginal utility until around the 7th or 8th piece of pizza, but we're all different. So anyway, that's how the law of demand is partially explained by the law of diminishing marginal utility. If the price of something goes up, we're going to buy fewer units of the thing because we're comparing the price we're paying to the marginal utility of the number of things we're buying. This is another example of the law of diminishing marginal utility, which explains how much of a product people buy. Imagine that this is in a theater at the concession stand, and let's say that the soft drinks they're selling are 25 cents per ounce. Well, people are going to buy the 12-ounce portion. Imagine that there's all different sizes of soft drinks available at this concession stand. If it's 25 cents per ounce, people will be buying the 12-ounce size of soft drink. But if the price were dropped to 20 cents per ounce, then we'd be buying the 16-ounce soft drink. And if the price was dropped further to 15 cents per ounce, they'd buy the 20-ounce. Well, why not have all of these, or maybe several of these different sizes available? But the only way people are going to buy the larger sizes is if you lower the price. Because again, they're thinking of the marginal utility they're getting by buying more and more units of the thing, ounces of the drink. More and more ounces are worth less and less extra benefit to me, so I'll only buy still more of them if the price were to drop. And this is that same data in a graph. So you can see point F would have been like where we started, let's say 25 cents per ounce, and then the average consumer is buying 12 ounces per show, per movie. But if the price were to drop to 20 cents per ounce, the average consumer would buy 16 ounces. So why not offer 12-ounce version of the product at 25 cents an ounce, whatever that price would be, and then also offer a 16-ounce version of the soft drink at 20 cents per ounce. So far we've been talking about how an individual consumer decides how much of something to buy depending on the price. And that explains the individual consumer's demand schedule. Well, again, I'll just remind you that market demand is just the sum or aggregate of all of the individual demands of all the consumers in the market. It's the sum of the individual quantities demanded at each particular price. That's the market demand. So the law of diminishing marginal utility explains market demand in that way. Now in Chapter 5, Part B, we're going to talk about consumer surplus, a very interesting topic. So I'll see you in Part B.